as a magnificent body of "foundations, endowed by kings, and resorted to by the flower of the national youth. Oxford is always elegant and even splendid in her habits; yet, on the other hand, as a grave seat of learning, and feeling the weight of her position in the commonwealth, she is slow to move, she is inert as she should be, having the functions of resistance assigned to her against the popular instinct of movement. Now, in Oxford, about 1804 05, there was a general move in the dinner hour. Those colleges who dined at 3, of which there are still several now dined at 4. Those who had dined at 4 now translated their hour to 5. These continued good general hours, but still amongst the more intellectual orders, till about Waterloo. After that era, 6, which had been somewhat of a gala hour, was promoted to the fixed station of dinner time in ordinary, and there perhaps it will rest through centuries. For a more festal dinner, 7, 8, 9, 10 have all been in requisition since then, but we have not yet heard of any man's dining later than 10 P.M., except in that single classical instance, so well remembered from our father Joe, of an Irishman who must have dined much later than 10, because his servant protested, when others were enforcing the dignity of their masters by the lateness of their dinner hours, that his master dined tomorrow. Were the Romans not as barbarous as our own ancestors at one time? Most certainly they were. In their primitive ages they took their coena at noon. To follow. That was before they had laid aside their barbarism, before they shaved. It was during their barbarism, and in consequence of their barbarism, that they timed their coena thus unseasonably. Took their coena at noon. And by the way, in order to show how little coena had to do with any evening hour, though in any age but that of our fathers, 4 in the afternoon would never have been thought an evening hour in the sense implied by supper. The Roman gourmands and bons vivants continued through the very last ages of Rome to take their coena, when more than usually sumptuous, at noon. This indeed all people did occasionally, just as we sometimes give a dinner even now so early as 4 P.M., under the name of a déjeuner à la fourchette. Those who took their coena so early as this were said dedai coenere, to begin dining from high day, just as the line in Horace, ut jugulent homines surgunt, de nocte latrones, does not mean that the robbers rise when the others are going to bed, viz., at nightfall, but at midnight. For, says one of the 3 best scholars of this earth, dedai de nocte mean from that hour which was most fully, most intensely day or night, viz., the center, the meridian. This one fact is surely a clencher as to the question whether coena meant dinner or supper. And this is made evident by the fact that, so long as they erred in the hour, they erred in the attending circumstances. At this point they had no music at dinner, no festal graces, and no reposing upon sofas. They sate bolt upright in chairs, and were as grave as our ancestors, as rabid, and doubtless as furiously in haste. With us the revolution has been equally complex. We do not, indeed, adopt the luxurious attitude of semi-recumbency. Our climate makes that less requisite, and, moreover, the Romans had no knives and forks, which could scarcely be used in that posture. They ate with their fingers from dishes already cut up. Whence the peculiar force of Seneca's "Post quod non sunt lavandi manos." But exactly in proportion as our dinner has advanced towards evening, have we and has that advance in circumstances of elegance, of taste, of intellectual value. That by itself would be much. Infinite would be the gain for any people that it had ceased to be brutal, animal, fleshy, ceased to regard the chief meal of the day as a ministration only to an animal necessity. They had raised it to a far higher standard, associated it with social and humanizing feelings, with manners, with graces both moral and intellectual. Moral in self-restraint, intellectual in the fact, notorious to all men, that the chief arenas for the easy display of intellectual power are at our dinner tables. But dinner has now even a greater function than this. As the fervor of our day's business increases, dinner is continually more needed in its office of a great reaction. We repent that, at this moment, but for the daily relief of dinner, the brain of all men who mix in the strife of capitals would be unhinged and thrown off its center. If we should suppose the case of a nation taking three equidistant meals, all of the same material and the same quantity, all milk, for instance, it would be impossible for Thomas Aquinas himself to say which was or was not dinner. The case would be that of Roman ancillae, which dropped from the skies. To prevent its ever being stolen, the priests made 11 facsimiles of it, that the thief, seeing the hopelessness of distinguishing the true one, might let all alone. And the result was, that in the next generation nobody could point to the true one. But our dinner, the Roman coena, is distinguished from the rest by far more than the hour. It is distinguished by great functions and by still greater capacities. It is most beneficial. It may become more so. In saying this, we point to the lighter graces of music and conversation, more varied, by which the Roman coena was chiefly distinguished from our dinner. We are far from agreeing with Mr. Crawley that the Roman meal was more intellectual than ours. On the contrary, ours is more intellectual by much. We have far greater knowledge, far greater means for making it such. In fact, the fault of our meals is, that it is too intellectual, of too severe a character, too political, too much tending, in many hands, to disquisition, reciprocation of question and answer, variety of topics, shifting of topics, and points not sufficiently cultivated. In all else we